Hey, Fanboy Nation.
This is your pal Daffy Duck, and you're watching.
You're watching.
We're watching. You're watching Fanboy.
Fanboy. Fanboy.
Fanboy.
Fanboy.
A fanboy, etc.
Fanboy Nation.
Dot, I assume Tom.
Celyn Jones, it is a pleasure to chat with you this morning about your directorial debut. If I read all your accolades, we'd be running out of interview time at this point. But we are talking about The Almond and The Seahorse. Congratulations. What a powerful film.
Oh, thank you, RC. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed.
For a directorial debut, and for you to, we're talking about TBI, traumatic brain injury. I've had a couple of concussions myself, so it was important for me to want to watch this film. You're still able, in the tragedy of it all, to still find a remote hope, like coffee bean size of hope for the future with the people that are suffering through this, not only themselves, but their loved ones. How important for you was it to at least give some sense of hope in telling the story?
I think you're absolutely right. I think to tell a story like this and to make a film about it, hope and survival are absolutely key. You tell a story like this, for it not to be weighed down by tragedy and misery, and to make sure there's enough lightness of touch and light on the screen to tell, to tell a big story that can affect lots of people. You have to tell it with sincerity and humor and light and be as succinct as possible. And you've got to give hope and you've got to give survival. Otherwise, we won't get off the starting line, I think, and the idea that just because, where does all that love go? You cannot switch it off. And that's one of the tragedies of the story, is being forgotten, forgetting and being forgotten. And where do you put that love if it can't go in the direction you left it?
I think the first film I ever saw related to this was 50 First Dates, and that was a comedy trying to make light of it. And then everything else has been a documentary, whether it's been boxing, mixed martial arts, or American football. But you give it a more humanized story in the hope and humor within the tragedy for an everyday person, rather than like, oh, that just happens to those athletes, or, oh, it's just played for laughs. And I think that's something that the audience will really appreciate.
Oh, thank you. I hope so. I mean, the late, great Oliver Sacks described this as the silent epidemic. And with this film coming out, it's so interesting how many people have when they've watched it, they come up to me and say, oh, I was affected by that, or I had an experience like that, whether I had an elderly relative who had dementia, or had a concussion themselves, or they were affected by it through the ripples and ramifications of somebody within their world, or they'd witnessed it. Or even if they weren't affected by traumatic brain injury, just the idea of, having your heart broken is really, you can relate to it. And I think 51st States has that. There's a similar condition in our film, and it's called The Almond and The Seahorse, after the amygdala and the hippocampus, which are the parts of the brain that lay down new memories. And the dilemma of these characters who can't have neurologically cannot have a future together. Emotionally, they want to have a future together, but neurologically they can't. So I thought that was an interesting world to sort of explore. But, like you say, hopefully make it there, but for the grace of whoever, go all of us. It could happen to, anyone at any time.
Yeah. You have one line in the film, and I'm not going to give it away too much because it's already in the trailer, where one of the characters sits there and goes, yes, but tomorrow I'll wake up a young woman again. I might be paraphrasing that. And there's still that hope in the person that has suffered TBI, that at least there's something to look forward to. And that's incredibly moving.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think it was really important for us when we were writing the script, when we were adapting the play with Kaite O'Reilly, is that it was not the tragic characters were the ones without the traumatic brain injury. We're not just going to rubberneck in and look at the people with these weird and wonderful neurological conditions that, and we get to sit there and go, well, at least it didn't happen to us. We wanted it to be, my character and Trina's character, in some ways, we meet them, they have the condition. And, they have to learn a new way around it and with it and supported by it and a new direction to sort of, and then hopefully find some better peace within it. But Rebel Wilson and Charlotte Gainsbourg's characters, they have to find a whole new future. And in some ways, they're the brains that can't be mended in this situation. And in some ways, I think that's why I really like the politics and the thrust of this story because of that, because we could have told a very, very different story about, people with traumatic brain injury, but this is about, traumatic heart injuries as well as traumatic brain injuries.
What was the absolute catalyst, the genesis of it all for you to sit there and go, this is the one that I have to make my directorial debut in? I mean, you adapted it from a play, but, was it the first act of the play when you saw it? Was it when you actually read the play beforehand, before the adaptation? Like, how did it all come about that you said, this is the one that I have to put my flag into?
Well, I played the original Joe on stage. So I was in the first ever production playing the same character. So I experienced firsthand its effect on an audience. I listen to them laugh and cry and come and find me after the show and want to talk about their experience. So I knew it had some magic within it. And then when we wrote the script, excuse me, when we wrote the script, I knew that actors would respond to the material. I had an instinct that it would be a great actor's piece. And I thought it lives in those traditions of those great performance-driven films. So the bullseyes were kind of about creating a film that actors can feel safe and thrive in and be daring and brave, and audiences can connect with emotionally. They were the two, targets, should we say. So, and then when the script started going out and people started responding to it, and very quickly it turned out that I was going to direct it with Tom, it just sort of made sense. It just felt very kind of natural and organic, really, to the process that, oh yeah, it probably should be me. It should be us to do it. And because we've got a good angle on it tonally and what will need to be done, and to set the scene where the actors can do the job we need them to do, really.
Before I let you go, since we're running out of time, and please forgive me for interrupting because I want to get this final question in. What is it like performing Joe on stage versus on film, and how does the character differ between the two performances?
I think there's a lot more of Joe in the film. In the play was very, very different, but in essence the characters are there. It's a brave leap on screen, because you're playing somebody with great disinhibition and seeing how far you can push those edges of the performance. Case in point, the cigarette sequence with the cigarettes and the pills and all that. Can you remain truthful and relatable whilst pushing the edges of feeling and emotion and despair and all those things? So I guess in some ways we got to go a lot further in the film than on the stage. But very much everything I loved about the character was still in the film that I loved on stage. We were just able to fully round it and explore it a lot more and be with him and Rebel's character Sarah, and give the story a resolve at the end, and a bit of an emotional, satisfactory sort of hopeful message at the end of it. So I just feel like it was an evolution, I guess, is the right answer. It evolved from the stage onto the screen, and I'm excited for audiences to witness characters forget. You know, you get to watch these characters awake and remember for the first time and see for the first time and forget, and you can sit there and in some ways an audience will lay down a memory that the character won't have anymore. And I think that's a kind of cool thing as an audience member, where you go, wow, I'm going to watch this 7-8 minute cigarette sequence, but Joe ain't going to remember it, but we will. And, you know, in some ways it connects I think that's why audiences, we were very lucky to win I won the jury award at Dinard, and audiences really, really liked it. And I think there's something in that they get to experience, they get to be Rebel Wilson and they get to be Charlotte Gainsbourg. That's what the audiences get to be, because between the audience and Charlotte and Rebel, there will be a shared experience. But for Joe and for Gwen, Trina and myself, it'll be a new experience every time.
I love it. Where can we? Oh, it's absolutely brilliant. Remind us the release date of the film, and where can we find you on social media once you know, we want to connect?
Oh, you can find me just Celyn Jones. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter, Celyn Jones, CELYN Jones, or via Mattersbirds Films. And the film is released by IFC Films this Friday on the 16th of December, cinemas and on digital, you know, where you find movies. And yeah, please, you know, if you want to, you know, send me a message if you like it, you got any questions, and have a great holiday. And I really appreciate your attention. I see, and really, thanks very much for having me on. I'm glad you liked the movie.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Celyn Jones, it's been a great pleasure.